Sometimes a single word can stop an empire faster than any army. The Grand Hall of Aurelia had witnessed coronations, treaties, and celebrations that shaped the history of entire star systems. Yet on this particular afternoon, none of those events mattered. Sunlight poured through crystal domes suspended nearly 200 feet above the polished silver floor. Hundreds of nobles stood beneath banners woven from luminous fabric. Military officers occupied the eastern galleries. Scholars, diplomats, and foreign representatives filled every available seat. The atmosphere carried the formal weight expected inside the residence of a queen. Then a small voice shattered it. "Father!" Every conversation died instantly. Princess Nira sprinted across the hall with all the determination that only a 6-year-old child could possess. Her golden hair bounced behind her as she ran past guards, advisors, and bewildered attendants. Before anyone could react, she wrapped both arms around the leg of a very surprised human standing near the center of the chamber. Michael Hayes froze. The 41-year-old engineer had spent most of the morning repairing a failing energy relay beneath the palace. He had expected technical reports, maintenance schedules, and perhaps a late lunch. He had not expected an alien princess clinging to his leg in front of half the government. The hall remained silent. Nobles stared. Advisors stared. Guards stared. Michael looked down. Nira looked up at him with complete confidence. "Father," she repeated happily. Somewhere in the distance, a ceremonial cup slipped from someone's hand and clattered against the floor. The sound echoed through the chamber. Michael opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I think," he said carefully, "there may be some confusion." "No confusion." Nira smiled brightly. "You are father." The silence somehow deepened. At the far end of the hall, Queen Alara stood from her throne so quickly that the folds of her royal gown swept across the steps beneath her. Her turquoise skin darkened slightly around her cheeks. To anyone unfamiliar with her species, the change might have gone unnoticed. To every member of her court, it was unmistakable. The queen was embarrassed. Deeply embarrassed. "Nira," she said. The child turned. "Yes, mother." "Be quiet." Several advisors immediately pretended to examine documents. Others suddenly found the architecture fascinating. Nobody wanted to be caught watching. Everyone watched anyway. Nira looked genuinely confused. "Why?" Alara descended the steps with as much dignity as possible under the circumstances. "Because that is not an appropriate thing to announce in the middle of a royal assembly." "But it is true." Michael rubbed a hand across his face. "Your Majesty, I feel obligated to support the quiet option." Nira crossed her arms. "You always support the quiet option." That statement only made matters worse. Audible gasps spread through the audience. Michael closed his eyes briefly. The queen closed hers as well. Somewhere near the rear of the chamber, a diplomat whispered, "Always." The question traveled through the crowd like a spark through dry grass. Michael had absolutely no idea how his ordinary engineering contract had somehow led to this moment. What he did know was that every person in the palace suddenly wanted the same answer. Why was the princess calling a human engineer her father? The royal assembly ended 23 minutes earlier than scheduled. Officially, the reason was an unexpected maintenance issue involving palace infrastructure. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. No one in the Grand Hall could focus on diplomatic matters after Princess Nira had publicly attached herself to a human engineer and repeatedly called him father. By evening, the story had already spread through half the palace. Servants whispered about it in corridors. Guards discussed it during shift changes. Advisors suddenly found themselves very interested in Michael Hayes's employment records. Michael personally wished the nearest airlock would open and allow him to disappear into deep space. Instead, he sat alone inside a quiet palace garden surrounded by silver-leaf trees and glowing fountains. The evening air carried the scent of flowering vines imported from distant worlds. Somewhere nearby, water flowed softly over crystal stone. For the first time all day, silence surrounded him. "Found you." Michael looked up. Queen Alara stood at the entrance to the garden pathway. The formal robes from the assembly had been replaced by simpler royal attire. Without the crown and ceremonial jewelry, she appeared younger. Less like a ruler. More like a mother trying to survive an unusually embarrassing afternoon. Michael immediately stood. "Your Majesty." Alara sighed. "Please stop looking so terrified." "I am not terrified." "Michael." He considered that. Moderately terrified. That earned the smallest smile. The queen approached and sat on a stone bench beneath the silver leaves. For a moment neither spoke. The memory of the assembly still lingered between them. Eventually, Elira looked toward one of the glowing fountains. I apologize for Nira. Michael blinked. Why? The queen looked genuinely surprised by the question. Because she announced something absurd in front of half the government. Children do that. Not usually during royal proceedings. That part is fair. Another small smile appeared, then vanished. Elira folded her hands together. She likes you. Michael nodded. I noticed. More than most people. The human stared at the fountain for several seconds. She is lonely. The answer came too quickly. Too honestly. Elira looked at him. You figured that out. It was not difficult. The queen lowered her gaze. Nira was loved by an entire kingdom. Protected by elite guards. Surrounded by tutors, attendants, and advisors. Yet Michael had identified the one thing none of those people could provide. Time. A child could recognize the difference. Most people speak to her like a future queen, Elira said quietly. You speak to her like a little girl. Michael shrugged. Because she is a little girl. The simplicity of the answer hung in the air. Elira laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was obvious. And somehow nobody else seemed to understand it. A sudden burst of movement interrupted the conversation. Tiny footsteps raced across the pathway. Both adults turned at the same time. Nira appeared carrying a brightly colored toy spacecraft missing one wing. She stopped directly in front of Michael. It broke. Michael accepted the toy and examined the damage. I can fix this. The child immediately smiled. Then she looked at her mother. See? Elira closed her eyes briefly. Nira. Yes. Please do not call him father again. The little princess frowned as though the request made no sense whatsoever. Then she looked back at Michael. Can father fix it tonight? Somewhere beyond the garden walls, a palace servant dropped something very expensive. By the following morning, nearly everyone in the palace knew about the toy spacecraft. Not because the repair itself was important. Because of who repaired it. Michael Hayes had spent less than 20 minutes replacing the damaged stabilizer fin and recalibrating the miniature guidance system. To him, it was routine work. To Princess Nira, it was apparently evidence supporting a very specific theory. The problem became obvious during breakfast. The royal dining chamber overlooked the eastern gardens where sunlight reflected from crystal fountains and silver trees. Servants moved quietly between tables. Advisors reviewed schedules while standing a respectful distance away. Queen Elira hoped for a peaceful morning. Instead, Nira arrived carrying the repaired spacecraft above her head like a sacred artifact. Look, she announced proudly. Father fixed it. Every sound in the room stopped. Elira lowered her cup of tea with the careful precision of someone attempting not to react. Several attendants suddenly became fascinated by the ceiling. Michael considered diving beneath the table. Nira sat down happily and continued eating as though nothing unusual had happened. Nira, Elira said patiently. What have we discussed? Many things. Specifically, the little princess thought for a moment. Vegetables. Michael pressed a hand against his forehead. Elira closed her eyes. The child was impossible to argue with because she genuinely believed she was helping. Breakfast continued. At least, everyone pretended it did. Yet Michael noticed something throughout the meal. Nira kept watching him. Not constantly, just enough to be noticeable. When he poured himself tea, she smiled. When he helped an elderly servant carry a tray that looked too heavy, she smiled again. When he repaired a malfunctioning display panel near the wall between courses, she looked positively delighted. It was as though she had already reached a conclusion and now spent every hour gathering supporting evidence. Later that afternoon, Michael found himself walking through the palace library searching for technical schematics related to the energy relay project. The library occupied 3 levels beneath a glass dome filled with natural sunlight. Thousands of books and data archives stretched into the distance. The quiet should have been relaxing. It was not, because tiny footsteps followed him everywhere. Michael turned. Nira immediately pretended to examine a bookshelf. You are following me. No, you absolutely are. Maybe a little. The child smiled. Michael sighed. Why? Nira considered the question carefully. Because fathers are supposed to teach things. The answer surprised him. Not because of the word. He was becoming disturbingly accustomed to that word. Because of the certainty behind it. Who told you that? Nira pointed toward a nearby shelf. Children's stories. Family histories. Educational programs. The library contained thousands of references describing parents. Michael slowly crouched to her eye level. Nira. Yes. You know I am not actually your father. The little princess looked genuinely confused. Then why do you do all the father things? Michael opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Unfortunately, he discovered he had absolutely no answer. Because from Nira's perspective, the evidence probably looked overwhelming. He listened. He helped. He fixed broken things. He spent time with her when others were busy. Children rarely cared about titles. They cared about presence. And in that moment, Michael realized the palace had a much bigger problem than gossip. Somewhere along the way, an alien princess had quietly decided what a father looked like. And entirely by accident, she had chosen him as the example. Queen Alyra spent the next 3 days discovering something she had never expected. It was not that Michael Hayes was especially charming. He was not. He was awkward around royalty. He forgot formal titles. He frequently carried tools into rooms where tools definitely did not belong. Once he accidentally attended a diplomatic briefing because he thought it was a maintenance meeting. The surprising part was how naturally he fit into the spaces between palace life. The Queen first noticed it during an afternoon council session. Advisors debated trade agreements while ministers discussed agricultural forecasts from distant provinces. The meeting dragged on for nearly 2 hours. Through the tall crystal windows, sunlight painted golden patterns across the chamber floor. Most participants remained focused on reports and projections. Alyra happened to glance outside. In the courtyard below, Princess Nira sat beside Michael beneath a flowering tree. The engineer was helping her assemble a model starship from spare mechanical components. Neither seemed aware they were being watched. Nira talked constantly. Michael listened. Every so often he adjusted a component or offered advice. Then he listened some more. The Queen returned her attention to the council meeting. 5 minutes later she looked outside again. They were still talking. That should not have surprised her. Yet it did. Most adults in the palace spoke to Nira. Michael listened to her. The difference mattered more than anyone realized. Later that evening, Alyra found Michael in a maintenance corridor beneath the western wing. The energy relay project that had brought him to the palace was nearly complete. Diagnostic lights glowed softly along the walls. The air smelled faintly of warm metal and electrical systems. Michael sat on a storage crate reviewing repair notes. There you are, the Queen said. He looked up. That usually means I forgot something important. You did not. Good. Because I already checked 3 times. Alyra sat beside him. The action surprised them both. Queens rarely sat on maintenance crates. Nira likes you, she said. Michael stared at the corridor ahead. I noticed that too. You do not seem alarmed anymore. I am still alarmed. The Queen laughed softly. At least you are honest. Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Alyra spoke again. Do you know why she keeps calling you father? Michael opened his mouth, closed it, thought carefully. Because I fix things? That cannot be the entire reason. I also make pancakes. The Queen covered her face with one hand. Michael. Sorry. His smile faded. Truthfully, she nodded. I think she misses having someone around. The answer struck closer than he realized. Alyra looked down at her hands. Since becoming queen, every hour of her life belonged to duty. Meetings, decisions, ceremonies, responsibilities. She loved her daughter more than anything in the galaxy. Yet love and time were not always the same thing. Michael seemed to understand that without needing an explanation. You are a good mother, he said quietly. Alyra looked up. How do you know? Because she talks about you constantly. The Queen felt warmth rise unexpectedly to her cheeks. Michael returned his attention to the maintenance reports, apparently unaware of the effect his words had. For the first time in many years, Alyra found herself smiling for no political reason at all. Somewhere above them, Nira's laughter echoed through the palace halls. And neither of them realized that the little princess had already begun changing both of their lives. The palace staff eventually stopped trying to understand the situation. Not because they had answers, because they had accepted that Princess Nira operated according to rules known only to herself. For nearly 2 weeks, the little princess continued treating Michael Hayes as though he had always been part of her life. Every morning she searched for him before breakfast. Every afternoon she appeared wherever his maintenance work happened to take him. Every evening, she found new reasons to delay bedtime conversations. The pattern became so consistent that palace attendants quietly adjusted schedules around it. Michael noticed the change first when he entered the Eastern workshop one morning and discovered a child-sized chair positioned beside his workbench. What is that? He asked. Nira looked up from a collection of spare mechanical parts. My chair. Why do you have a chair in a maintenance workshop? Because I work here now. Michael glanced toward the supervising technician. The technician immediately found something fascinating on the opposite side of the room. Nobody was willing to challenge the princess, especially when she looked so proud of herself. Over the following days, Nira became his unofficial assistant. She handed him tools, organized replacement components, asked endless questions about engines, energy relays, and starships. Most of the questions had absolutely nothing to do with the project. If a spaceship had 600 windows, how many birds could fit inside? Hopefully none. What if they were very polite birds? Michael never understood how she arrived at these questions. Yet somehow he always found himself answering them. One afternoon, Queen Allura arrived unexpectedly and found the two of them sitting cross-legged on the workshop floor, surrounded by mechanical parts. Neera held a wrench nearly half her size. Michael appeared to be explaining the difference between power conduits and coolant pipes using toy blocks. The Queen stopped in the doorway. Neither noticed her at first. Neera was laughing. Michael was laughing too. The sound felt strangely unfamiliar inside the palace. Not unpleasant, just rare. Eventually Neera spotted her mother and waved excitedly. "Mother, look." Alyra approached. "What am I looking at?" "Father is teaching engineering." Michael nearly dropped a tool. Several technicians suddenly became very busy. The Queen covered her eyes for a moment. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. The reaction surprised everyone, including herself. Neera immediately smiled. "See? You like him too." Silence followed. Michael focused intensely on a nearby toolbox. The technicians discovered urgent reasons to leave the room. Alyra's cheeks darkened slightly. "Neera." "Yes. Please stop making observations." The child considered the request carefully. "But they are accurate observations." That evening, after the workshop finally emptied, Michael remained behind finishing diagnostic reports. Through the open doorway, he could see the palace gardens glowing beneath twilight. Soft lights reflected across fountains and crystal pathways. Alyra appeared beside him carrying 2 cups of tea. She offered him one. "Thank you." "For the tea." "For being patient with her." The Queen looked toward the gardens. "You make her happy." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight neither of them ignored. Michael stared into the steam rising from his cup. "She makes me happy too." For a moment neither spoke. Somewhere in the distance, Neera's laughter echoed through the palace halls. And without realizing it, both adults found themselves smiling at exactly the same sound. 3 weeks after Michael Hayes arrived at the palace, an uncomfortable reality began approaching from a direction nobody could ignore. His work was almost finished. The damaged energy network beneath the capital had been repaired. Auxiliary systems had been upgraded. Emergency reserves operated at full efficiency. Every diagnostic report produced the same conclusion. The project was nearing completion. Michael noticed it first when engineers stopped bringing him urgent problems. The endless stream of maintenance requests slowed. Technical meetings became shorter. Spare parts disappeared from his workbench one section at a time. The signs were subtle, yet impossible to miss. One afternoon, he stood alone inside the central reactor chamber reviewing final system readings. Soft blue light reflected from polished machinery stretching hundreds of feet overhead. The station hummed with stable energy for the first time in years. Michael folded his report and sighed. That sounds like someone thinking too loudly. He turned. Queen Alyra stood near the entrance carrying a tablet. The familiar sight no longer surprised him. Somehow she always seemed to know where he was. "Just finishing paperwork," he replied. "You dislike paperwork." "I dislike what paperwork usually means." The Queen's expression softened slightly. She understood immediately. Finished projects meant departures. Michael had spent most of his adult life moving from one assignment to another. Stay long enough to help, then leave before becoming part of the place. The pattern felt normal. It always had. Yet something about this time felt different. "When?" Alyra asked quietly. Michael looked back at the reactor systems. "Another week, maybe." The words hung in the air. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The machinery continued its steady rhythm around them. Finally, the Queen nodded. "Neera will not like that." Michael laughed softly. "Neither will I." The honesty surprised both of them. Later that evening, the problem became much worse. Neera discovered the travel schedule. Nobody knew exactly how. Palace security could protect classified military communications, but they had never successfully protected information from a determined 6-year-old princess. Michael found her sitting beside a fountain in the Western Gardens. Her repaired toy spacecraft rested in her lap. Normally, she greeted him immediately. This time she did not. "You are leaving." It was not a question. Michael sat beside her. Eventually. Next week. The precision confirmed his suspicions. She had somehow obtained the schedule. Again, Neera stared at the water. "I do not want you to go." The simplicity of the statement struck harder than any dramatic speech could have. Michael looked toward the palace lights reflecting across the garden paths. Finding an answer suddenly felt impossible. Because the truth was painfully simple. He did not want to leave either. Sometimes people have to travel, he said carefully. Nira shook her head. That is a grown-up answer. Michael almost smiled. It is. I wanted a real answer. Silence settled between them. Somewhere nearby, night insects sang beneath silver leaves. Finally, Michael spoke. The real answer is that I am going to miss you. Nira looked up. Tears had not appeared. She was trying very hard to be brave. That somehow made the moment even harder. Then stay. Michael opened his mouth. No words came out. Because for the first time in many years, he realized he did not actually know why he could not. The days that followed felt strangely fragile. Nothing dramatic happened. No crisis threatened the kingdom. No emergency interrupted palace life. Yet an invisible countdown seemed to follow everyone through the halls. Every clock mattered. Every morning felt slightly more valuable than the one before it. Michael Hayes continued completing final inspections across the energy network while pretending everything remained normal. Princess Nira continued pretending she believed him. Neither was particularly successful. One afternoon, Michael found her sitting on the roof of the Western Observatory. The palace rose above the capital like a city of crystal towers and silver bridges. Beyond the walls stretched forests, rivers, and distant mountains glowing beneath late afternoon sunlight. Nira sat with her knees pulled against her chest, staring toward the horizon. There you are, Michael said. Everyone has been looking for you. I know. That is generally why people look. The little princess managed a weak smile. Michael sat beside her. The wind carried the scent of flowers from the gardens below. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Nira pointed toward the sky. Small transport vessels moved between distant cities, leaving thin trails of light behind them. Which one will be yours? The question hurt more than Michael expected. I do not know yet. You could still stay. There it was again. The simplest solution in the galaxy. Spoken by the only person brave enough to keep repeating it. Michael looked toward the distant mountains. Nira. Yes. Sometimes adults make promises before they understand what they are promising. That sounds like a mistake. It usually is. The child nodded thoughtfully. Then maybe adults should stop doing that. Michael laughed despite himself. The logic was difficult to argue with. Later that evening, Queen Alyra found him standing alone in the palace courtyard. The stars had begun appearing overhead. Lanterns illuminated stone pathways winding through the gardens. Soft music drifted from a distant reception hall. The queen approached quietly. She was on the observatory again. Michael nodded. I found her. Alyra folded her arms. She thinks if she asks enough times, you will change your mind. The human stared at the stars. Maybe she is smarter than both of us. The queen looked at him sharply. The words hung in the air longer than either expected. Because beneath the joke lay something neither had wanted to discuss. Michael no longer felt certain about leaving. The realization had been growing quietly for days. Every breakfast, every conversation, every afternoon spent helping Nira build ridiculous mechanical projects. Every evening spent talking with Alyra about subjects that had nothing to do with energy systems. Somewhere along the way, the palace stopped feeling temporary. Your Majesty, Alyra smiled softly. Michael, right. He looked down at the courtyard stones. Do you ever wonder when a place becomes home? The question surprised both of them. The queen considered it carefully. I think home is the place where people notice when you are gone. Silence followed. Not awkward, just honest. Michael stared toward the lights shining from the palace windows. He imagined leaving, boarding a transport, watching the kingdom disappear beneath the clouds. For the first time, the thought felt wrong. Above them, stars drifted slowly across the night sky. And somewhere inside the palace, a little girl still believed the answer was obvious. Maybe, for once, the child was the only person seeing things clearly. The final inspection was scheduled for Friday morning. Every engineer in the palace knew it. Every administrator knew it. Queen Alyra knew it. Most importantly, Princess Nira knew it. The date hung over the palace like approaching weather. Nobody mentioned it directly. Nobody needed to. The knowledge existed in every conversation and every quiet moment. Michael Hayes spent most of Thursday completing the last system certifications beneath the Eastern Power Complex. The work should have required his full attention. Instead, he found himself staring at reports without reading them. Numbers blurred together. Diagnostic screens glowed softly in front of him. For perhaps the first time in his career, he was struggling to finish a project he had once been eager to complete. You missed 3 signatures. Michael looked up. Alyra stood beside the control console, holding a tablet. 3. That is embarrassing. You are distracted. The queen handed him the missing documents. Michael accepted them with a sigh. I have noticed. For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, technicians completed final evaluations while energy systems hummed steadily through the walls. The project was a success. By every measurable standard, it was time for him to leave. That simple fact no longer felt simple. Later that afternoon, Michael walked through the palace gardens, searching for Nira. The child had disappeared again. Normally, this meant she was hiding somewhere with a book, a mechanical project, or a completely unreasonable number of snacks. Eventually, he found her beneath the same silver leaf tree where they often spent time together. She sat quietly beside a small wooden box resting in her lap. There you are. Nira looked up. I was busy. Doing what? She held up the box. Making something. Michael sat beside her. May I see it? The little princess hesitated. Then she nodded. Inside the box rested dozens of small objects collected over the past several weeks. A broken circuit component from their first repair project. A tiny model spaceship. A drawing made with colored pencils. A maintenance badge. A polished stone from the royal gardens. Michael recognized every item immediately. You kept all of these? Nira nodded. Important things. The answer tightened something inside his chest. Because he understood exactly what she was doing. Children built memories using objects adults often overlooked. Every piece inside the box represented a moment. A conversation. A day spent together. This one is my favorite. Nira picked up the repaired spacecraft from weeks earlier. The same toy that started everything. Michael smiled. That old thing still works? Of course. She paused. You fixed it. Silence settled beneath the silver leaves. A warm breeze carried flower petals across the garden path. Finally, Nira closed the box. I have another question. Michael already knew the subject. Okay. If someone feels like family, she stared at the ground while speaking. Do they stop being family when they leave? The question hurt precisely because it came from a child. No politics. No complicated explanations. Just a simple fear. Michael looked toward the palace rising above the gardens. Then toward the little princess sitting beside him. No, he said quietly. Family does not work that way. Nira nodded. The answer seemed to help. Yet Michael noticed she still looked sad. And for the first time, he realized something important. The child was not afraid of losing a father. She was afraid of losing a home she had only recently found. The troubling part was that he felt exactly the same way. Friday arrived beneath a sky so clear that the crystal domes above the palace reflected the stars long after sunrise. The final inspection took less than 40 minutes. Every system passed. Every report was approved. Every engineer signed the required certifications. By noon, Michael Hayes stood in the central transit courtyard holding a travel case he no longer wanted to carry. Around him, palace staff moved through their daily routines. The world had not changed. Yet everything felt different. Princess Nira stood beside the fountain clutching the small wooden memory box she had shown him the day before. She had not said much that morning. The silence worried Michael more than tears would have. Queen Elara stood nearby, surrounded by advisors attempting to give her privacy while pretending not to. The atmosphere felt strangely formal, as though everyone expected a farewell speech. Michael hated farewell speeches. Well, he said quietly, I suppose this is it. Nira stared at the ground. Okay. The answer sounded brave. Too brave. Michael knelt beside her. Hey. The little princess looked up. Her amber eyes shimmered beneath the afternoon light. Family does not stop being family when people travel, remember? Nira nodded. I remember. Good. I still do not like it. Michael laughed softly. Neither do I. For a moment neither spoke. Then Nira opened the wooden box and carefully removed the repaired toy spacecraft. She placed it in his hand. Take this. Michael blinked. I thought it was your favorite. It is. Then you should keep it. Nira shook her head. No. Her voice remained small but certain. So you remember to come home. The words struck with the force of absolute honesty. Michael looked at the toy, then at the little girl standing before him, then toward Queen Elara. The queen's expression revealed everything she was trying very hard not to say. Stay? The thought hung in the air between all three of them. Not spoken. Not necessary. Michael slowly stood. His gaze drifted across the courtyard. The gardens. The workshops. The palace halls. The places that somehow stopped feeling temporary. He realized something then. For weeks he had treated departure like an obligation. An automatic next step. The same pattern he had followed his entire life. Finish the work. Pack the tools. Leave before becoming attached. But somewhere along the way, that pattern stopped making sense. Your Majesty. Elara looked up. Michael. He smiled. I have a question. Confusion crossed her face. What kind of question? Hypothetically, that is never a good sign. Several nearby advisors immediately paid attention. Michael ignored them. If an engineer happened to decide he preferred this kingdom to every other place he has worked, Elira's cheeks darkened slightly. Hypothetically, the queen tried very hard not to smile. Failed completely. Neera's eyes widened. Does that mean, it means, Michael interrupted gently, that maybe the project is not finished after all? The little princess launched herself at him before he could finish the sentence. Laughter echoed across the courtyard. Advisors gave up pretending not to watch. Even the palace guard smiled. Queen Elira looked toward the sky above the crystal domes. For the first time in many years, the future felt wonderfully uncertain. Michael held the toy spacecraft in one hand and the laughing child in the other. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, starships continued crossing the galaxy. Yet for the first time in a very long time, he had no desire to board any of them. Because sometimes a child sees the truth before anyone else. And sometimes a palace only becomes a home after someone finally decides to stay.